Here we go. All right, we got 3 people to get through, so I'm going to get started. Let me reshare my screen. Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Sarah Calise. I am one of the archivists at the Albert Gore Research Center at MTSU. I'm also part of the education committee with Society of Tennessee Archivists, so we welcome you to our second lunch talk, part 1 though of the LGBTQ archives in Tennessee. Part 2 will be next Tuesday at the same time, and you can find the registration info for that on our Facebook page. There's an event page for it, and if you are a STA member, then you should be getting emails about these lunch talks as well. So yeah, there's 3 of us today, and we're kind of going to go through what current archival collections we have related to Tennessee's queer history, maybe our future plans for strategizing how to get more queer history in our collections. And I will say this is not by any means, there's 6 institutions being represented over the 2 sessions, but there's more out there. These are just, you know, the 6 that we started off with, but I know there's institutions out there that also have queer archives, other universities and perhaps county archives. So we'd love for them to present in the future. So this is not exhaustive by any means, but we capped it at 6 because we already had to split into 2 sessions. So anyways, I'll get started talking about what we have here at the Gore Center at MTSU. So these are our current collections. It's not a lot. We probably only really started collecting queer history 2014-ish, 2015, when I was a graduate student actually working here. Previous archivists before me and my colleague Donna, queer history was not at the forefront of their priorities, unfortunately. But I identify as bisexual and non-binary, so it's at the forefront of my mind for sure. So when I became a full-time archivist here, I really try to start ramping up and diversifying many of our collections. So we started with the MT Lambda papers. MT Lambda is the student organization here at MTSU, the LGBT student organization. It's not the oldest. Austin P actually had the oldest, was founded in 1979. But my understanding is that dissolved quickly. And then it didn't arrive again until after MT Lambda had founded in 1988. So MT Lambda is the oldest continuously run student organization in Tennessee higher education. And around 2014, 2015, they had a student who was very history minded and archival minded. And my colleague Donna's the university archivist here. So they kind of work together to start documenting and preserving some of their material a lot. And then we have so that's MT Lambda papers was first, and I'll go through each of these a little bit. And then we have Out Central, which is something we really recently acquired and we're super excited about. And then very, very newly established Middle Tennessee LGBTQ collection, and of course oral histories, which we've been doing for decades here at the Gore Center. So once again, starting with the MT Lambda papers, that student whose name is Austin Dubik, he was very history minded, and he worked with Donna while he was an undergraduate here to start the transition process of donating some of the archives of that organization. A lot of it came as Born Digital, and that includes their very first founding documents. So they still maintain their physical copies, but they have allowed us to preserve digital copies of some of their oldest documents, including the one that said, you know, you're officially a student organization here at MTSU. We also have quite a few photographs from them. They do a lot of outreach across campus with large posters and banners. So we do have some of those physical, large painted posters. They do something called Spring Out every semester, which is like their week-long, kind of their own campus pride festival here. So there's a lot of stuff from Spring Out in this collection. They do events throughout the year, like drag shows. And so you see right here to the right, that's a poster from a drag show that they did in 2014. They're always passing out buttons and pamphlets, so we have that in the collection. This flag that you see here has an interesting story. In 2013, that was their first Spring Out Pride Festival. They had an exhibit, a display of sorts over in the library. And they had all the pride flags, you know, from asexual to transgender to bisexual up. And then they had this flag, which is, as you can see, a redesigned American flag to with the pride colors. And a disgruntled student ripped the flag down and took it, and it was missing for many weeks. And no one knew who did it. I guess there weren't cameras up at the time where the exhibit was in the library, so there wasn't any like video evidence. And it kind of became like an international news story. There were people in other countries that mailed letters to MT Lambda saying like, hey, we saw what happened, we support you. Someone from Canada even sent them like a Canadian pride version of their flag. Oh. The campus police eventually found the student who took it, and they got it back and returned it to MT Lambda. And now that flag resides in our archive. So that's a really interesting story. Yeah, we continue our relationship with MT Lambda. We continue to get born digital stuff, as well as more ephemeral material like their buttons that they produce every year. MT Lambda also hosts the LGBT+ College Conference, which is open to all of Tennessee and really truly all of the United States. It's every April, and people come and present from a wide variety of disciplines, and we always make sure that the Gore Center is represented at that conference, whether we are talking or presenting ourselves, or we just have a table out that shows some of the queer collections that we preserve. So Out Central collection, we received this in 2019, excuse me, 2019. And this also is kind of connected to MT Lambda in a way. A student who used to be the president of MT Lambda back in like 2013, 2014, when they were an undergrad, they continued their relationship with us, and they were a part of Out Central. Out Central was, the full name is Out Central Cultural Awareness Center, really is an LGBT community center in Nashville from 2008 to 2018. And this student that was also an MT Lambda was a part of their board after they graduated college. And when the organization went defunct in 2018, a bunch of the records were, you know, kind of got divided up among people or tossed out entirely. They saved what they could and kind of preserved them at the Middle Tennessee Community Foundation up in Nashville until they could find a home for them. And they came to us and asked if we wanted to help preserve them. And of course, you know, we said yes, since we already had a working relationship with this person too, it just made sense. So yeah, in 2019, we drove up to Nashville and got about, you know, stuff was in tubs, so 5-ish big tubs of papers and some boxes. And pandemic has kind of slowed down my pace a bit, so I just got to fully processing the collection this year, and I'm finishing up the finding aid now. But so in this collection includes a lot of the business records of Out Central, including financial statements, meeting minutes and agendas, pamphlets that they would produce and hand out. And they also ran a gay 5K marathon. So there's some like t-shirts and medals and posters from that gay 5K. Because Out Central was, according to my research, the fourth iteration of an LGBT community center in Nashville, they kind of naturally acquired material from other places too. So they had more historic material within their space. So with this Out Central collection came some issues of DARE, which was a 1988 founded LGBT newspaper in Nashville. We have 1988 to 1990 issues, and we've digitized all of those and made them available on the Gore Center's website, which I will link to at the end. We also have a couple issues of Xenogeny, which was another LGBT newspaper founded in Nashville in the 90s. And there are over 400 photographs that came with this Out Central collection. Most of them are of 1990s pride parades in Nashville. There are a couple other historic documents. There's some Gay Cable Network was a channel that was founded in 1988 as well and lasted through most of the 90s. And Gay Cable Network was a national organization, but they had chapters in big cities throughout the country. So Nashville started their own channel in '88. So we have some of their TV guides that we've also digitized and made available on the Gore Center website. And there's some photographs that have come with that too. So this collection, Out Central, has become really rich with material, and it's led to us doing more research for Nashville's queer history in general and Middle Tennessee's queer history. So it's been really great and allowed us to connect to some people in the community in order to get more stuff, like starting the Middle Tennessee LGBTQ collection. This was just established in the past few months because people they want to donate things, but it's like maybe like one or two little small things, or maybe it's more ephemeral material, or stuff that we've come across that we want to purchase. The archive itself purchases. So it's kind of going to go under this umbrella collection of just Middle Tennessee LGBTQ in general. This also includes the Borough Pride collection right now because it's currently very small, but assuming it will continue to grow each year as Borough Pride is held, then Borough Pride collection will probably become its own eventually. And finally, oral histories. The Gore Center has thousands of oral histories from, a lot of World War II veterans, people in general who've lived in Rutherford County for their whole lives, the Black community here. And so I recently started to do oral histories with LGBT community in Middle Tennessee. I've done a couple of so far, and I have about 10 people on a waiting list right now that I'm trying to schedule interviews with. It's me and one of my grad students basically doing a lot of this archival and oral history work. So we have very jam-packed schedules. So that's what we currently have, and our current collecting strategy for the future is a major focus on oral histories, just because we have major space issues at the Gore Center, unfortunately. I haven't actually been able to bring in any major collections for like over a year now, and I don't unfortunately see that being solved anytime soon. So focusing on things that can come to me in a born digital format. So, digitally recorded oral history, certainly. And so we're also, in that same sense, more focused on post-custodial methods. Post-custodial, it's just a fancy archives word for how can the Gore Center archivists help the community preserve their things within the community instead of extracting that material and placing it in an archival institution. So the Gore Center is very much interested in preserving digital copies of photos or documents, newspapers that people may have. Maybe they don't want to give them up yet, or they don't have the right space for them. We certainly, as I mentioned, don't have space for them. So yeah, we're super focused on oral histories and born digital material, or things that we can digitize and make accessible to the public via our website. Outreach that we've been doing, like I mentioned, we were at Borough Pride. I was at Nashville Pride this year, passing out buttons that I made based off of historic logos. We go to MT Lambda meetings a lot. I'll be going to one tomorrow to bring some of the archival material that I've shown you today, so the students can get their hands on some historic documents. Like I mentioned, there's the LGBT Plus College Conference, and just yesterday I filmed an Instagram takeover for the Nashville LGBT Chamber of Commerce, featuring some queer history that I've been researching using our archive. I know that was really fast, but like I said, we got 3 people to get through, but you can find me and our stuff at all of these links. This is also being recorded, as I mentioned. We'll put on our YouTube channel, so you can always come back to this, but there's the MTSU's website, or the MTSU Gore Center website. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at MTSU Gore Center. I personally started NashvilleQueerHistory.com. It is separate from the Gore Center technically, but you'll find a lot of Gore Center material on that website. And I also run Nashville Queer History Instagram. I'm doing a lot of personal research in this area. and hopefully we'll get some published scholarship out of it, because Nashville is unfortunately lacking a little bit in its scholarship on its queer history, and we know there's tons out there, so hopefully we can get that out there more. My personal email is sarah.calise@mtsu.edu. If you have questions for me, save them till the very end or shoot me an email, whichever. I'm going to now stop sharing my screen so I can hand it over to Brigitte.
And let me set my screen up too. Share and play. It'll let me. Here we go. So I'm here today to represent the MidSouth LGBTQ Plus Archive, and I am Brigitte Billeaudeaux with the Special Collections Department. I'm the Special Collections Librarian and Archivist at the University of Memphis Libraries. And just like, well, I will forefront this, that this did not start out just with me. It actually started out with a community of research scholars, and we got this little grant. And I started out with why an archives because we had identified a growing need within the campus community amongst historians and other people that are into queer studies, queer scholars that wanted to do research locally if they could. And we do not have a ton of established LGBTQ collections in Memphis, but I think that's growing, especially with the distribution of Out Memphis's collections and things, of which we have. That's our premier collection. But then also this kind of commitment that I have taken on for myself for diversity, equity, and inclusion. We haven't done the best job at University of Memphis in collecting reflective collections that talk about our community as a whole. Primarily, this has been a really strong African-American community, and we are lacking in those areas. We do have some very important African-American collections within our holdings, but you know, we can always do better. And we had very little as far as gay, lesbian, trans, LGBTQ was not something that's reflective. If it is, it's very buried. It's not something that we can outwardly acknowledge because the people that donated these collections weren't out in life. There's I have gone back and forth with my supervisor about like notating those types of materials, especially when that person wasn't out in life. So very, very few and far between. And so this group came together, the community of research scholars. It's interdisciplinary, historians, communications people. We got this small internal grant that focused really on establishing an archive, but finding a way to do student engagement. And so we did that. The first year we held an event on campus called Decentering Stonewall. And this was during it was going to be the 50th anniversary of Stonewall in New York. So this is also the year that we acquired the Out Memphis collection. That's Memphis's Out LGBTQ Community Center. And so we partnered with our on-campus group, GSA Stonewall Tigers, to do have this kind of like panel discussion. We brought someone in, Ricky Lash. She's a queer scholar out of, I think, DC is where she hails from. And then we had our first drag performance on campus, which was kind of historic in its own little right. That was more of the GSA's deal. But and then what and how we should collect. We talked a lot about that. We met with people in the community. We met with representatives from Out Memphis and quickly found out that we had different factions in Memphis. So this was going to be kind of, someone just kind of bluntly said at some point that Memphis has got a segregated history as far as our LGBTQ community goes. So we knew going into this that we were going to have to find ways to reach all types of audiences. And we did that. We went out into the public. I attended our first installation of the first Rainbow Crosswalk in Memphis. And then we were also dedicating our first LGBTQ plaque at the Evergreen Theater to commemorate the first public drag performance in Memphis, which was called the Miss Memphis Review, and that took place in 1969. So 2019 was a great big year for LGBTQ history here in town. So how it's going, as Sarah mentioned, using post-custodial archiving, this is what I want to focus on as far as we go forward. We have done traditional archiving and taking things in. We've kind of gotten a reputation for being the archive in town that will take three-dimensional objects, and that is true, especially if it's very centered on this part of the state, West Tennessee, the Mid-South, and Memphis. But we are having space issues too. We've taken in large campus collections recently, and there's just like stuff everywhere. So the pandemic didn't allow us to do a lot on site, but right before and coming into 2021, we have taken in a lot of stuff. So I really do, and really post-custodial archiving became much more aware to me and much more important to me after attending the Ally, or the Archives Leadership Institute. We did a lot with cultural competency, and that really spoke to me, and it felt like a really important way for me to use this within the community. So so those important artifacts could stay within the community, but at least we could document them, and students and researchers could have a place to come and learn more about history here, which is not well documented, I would say. So so what's in the archive? We have 3 named collections. So even though it's called the MidSouth LGBTQ Plus Archive, it's really comprised of named collections. We may get into the kind of like artificial collections where smaller donations may become kind of part of thematic things. But right now we are fortunate enough to have substantial donations from 3 different individuals. The premier is our Out Memphis collection, which is great, and it's important because it really goes back to 1989, and it encompasses collections from actually individuals, because there were attempts by this community center to take in archives from different individuals. So the artifacts actually go back to 1969, which are the oldest that we have that are known in town. We have the pleasure of having almost an entirely full run of these publications, and I hope that this is launching for you. We do have digital copies of all of the Out Memphis publications that are affiliated with this collection. They're available and they're searchable through our Digital Commons website. Additionally, through crowdfunding efforts, the CORS group, we weren't able to extend our grant, but we were able to crowdfund enough money to take the film footage from the Miss Memphis 1969 film, and there ended up being 2 films, and we were able to digitize them, and those are publicly available through Vimeo. And you can click on these. They kind of represent about around 40 minutes of footage. Unfortunately, they don't have sound, because the sound reel I found out and discovered with our partnership with Preserve South, who did the work. They're based in Beaufort, Georgia. That I'm looking actually for a smaller reel of audio, which is likely amongst the collection, because we do have other film amongst this collection. But this is true. Both of these are truly wonderful, and kind of arty, and just really reflective. And you can definitely spend a lot of time looking at them. I certainly have. So those are kind of like the highlights from this collection, along with a lot of the business organizational papers, and then materials related to Outflix. That's kind of like an LGBTQ film festival that we have. Typically takes place in the fall, around the time that Indie Memphis does their film festival as well. So we kind of have like these film festivals in the fall, and typically, while I know we celebrated Pride in June in the past, it gets really very oppressively hot in Memphis. So typically in fall is when we do Pride here in Memphis too. So we have the Vincent Aster collection. I think Mr. Aster's with us today, so that's wonderful. And his is a smaller collection. He has been very generous in donating his papers, not only to our public library, which is probably the oldest collection that we have in town of GLBTQ materials in town. He has donated a number of items, including like just different ephemera, a lot of media. This is kind of just a very small sample. We've got his Leatherman's jacket and his buttons, a couple of his costume or like his garments from Lady A, who is kind of like his drag persona, I guess. He may have a different way of putting it, but Lady A is definitely part of who Mr. Aster is. And we have a couple of garments that were worn by her. So none of these are fully processed. A lot of it has to do with time constraints, budget constraints, staffing constraints, and then also the pandemic. But about 6 cubic feet of the Out Memphis stuff has been archived, along with the digitization of that film footage. This is a newer acquisition that came to us it came to us in 2020, right before the pandemic hit. And he has recently made a second donation, and we hope to get more donations in the future. But so this will be eventually processed as we continue on. Our third collection comes from William Johns. I'm calling this a lifestyle collection. It kind of encompasses a lot of books that he's collected over the years, and then a lot of art too. So you kind of get like a very small sample. There are some films, I would call them lifestyle films, that range going back to Super 8, like 8mm film, up through VHS. So, but the jewel of the collection is the literature in this collection, because it spans just a lot of queer history, but then also a lot of different art, focusing mostly on the mail form. So that kind of encompasses the whole of the 3 collections that we have. It's just a very small taste based on what I was able to kind of get together in the last couple of days. And then going forward, so I've been pretty committed to this. The pandemic hasn't been the kindest to me about getting out and about. And I've also fallen pregnant. So I've been taking extra precautions. So I haven't done a lot of things this year. But in 2019, I attended the event that you see here, the installation of the crosswalk, and then also the celebration of putting the first placard up at the Evergreen Theater, which is where the Miss Memphis review took place. And we hope to do this again. We also attended Pride too. And the course group did as a whole, because we had other scholars doing work too on oral histories for qualitative research classes and different things like that. So we hope to have kind of different classes maybe make contributions to this archive over time, so it reflects kind of the efforts of the university as a whole, and not just the community members too. But I have met with seniors group as far as affiliated with the Out Memphis, and hopefully in 2021 we can have some community events to where I can meet with people to kind of build some capacity within the community, teach them about basic archiving, and then maybe also do some imaging of artifacts and ephemera on site, kind of under this post-custodial model, and then also incorporating oral histories to provide context. I'm getting an opportunity to do the post-custodial thing right now with a totally separate collection of an African-American military personnel, Colonel Toby Ingram. So this particular project is allowing me to kind of get my feet wet with this model, and hopefully I can perfect it going forward, so we can get with the community on this too. So, and I just wanted to thank you. I don't have our social media, but we are on Facebook, the MidSouth LGBTQ Archive. We also have an Instagram and a Twitter. These were manned by kind of like an on-campus student group that we have called Mima 901, and it hasn't been, but I try to update the Facebook one more often. I'm just not as literate as far as being pushing out content on the other things. So I'm an old person, but so thank you so much for listening, and please reach out if you have any questions about our holdings. You can reach us through lib_sc@memphis.edu. That's our departmental email, and then my individual email is underneath. So thank you very much. I'm going to go and stop sharing. So our next person can go. Okay, here we go. All right. I believe Donna, you're good to go.
Great, thank you so much. I've learned so much already from you all. My background is not in archives. I'm a reference librarian, so I appreciate all of the great tips. The East Tennessee LGBTQ History Project started in 2016, following, if you might have remembered, the defunding of the Pride Center and the Office of Diversity at University of Tennessee. It started out as an oral history project. We have 10 oral histories that are live. We have about 30 oral histories that are in process right now. We do transcribe all of our oral histories word for word, so that takes a little time. And then, of course, like the pandemic and all of that stuff that has also been mentioned has not been kind to us. I'm just going to highlight a few of our collections. We have many, many more, but Metropolitan Community Church was created in Knoxville in 1977, actually as an outreach of the MCC Church of Nashville. So there's a little cross-state history there. And because of that, they basically acted as like the de facto LGBT organization for decades here in Knoxville. So I was able to scan 1,900 pages of their collection that they lent to us. And in that, we find all types of things. So not only MCC church history, but they collected all types of things. So if there were organizations in town or events in town, that collection is just super rich for all types of materials. To my dismay, though, the materials are kept in boxes in the shed behind the church. So I guess I could do some post-custodial training. I'm glad that I learned about that today. So, all right. I'm just excited though that it actually exists, because it doesn't exist anywhere else but MCC. So I'm so thankful to them. The next collection I'm going to highlight is the Ed White collection. This is Ed White back in 1991. He is sort of I guess what would we call a community archivist. He saved so many things that wouldn't exist, so I'm very grateful, including photos from 1991 and 1992 Pride here in Knoxville, which were sort of the first, I guess, modern prides that had a parade and a festival and speakers and things. There were pride picnics and things going on earlier than that, but this is sort of when our pride festivals began. And you can see the UTK Gay and Lesbian Student Union banner here. From an Ed White collection, we also have the UTK student organization newsletter called Aware. So we have entire runs of that. And then also earlier was mentioned DARE out of Nashville, was a statewide LGBTQ newspaper. It changed from DARE to Query. And what I've heard is that DARE was getting confused, or I guess with the anti-drug campaign, DARE, and so they changed it to Query. And so we have not a complete set, but many of this newspaper. And we're having students help us with scanning and indexing and things like that. Let's see. This is the newsletter. Again, this came out of the MCC collection, but June 3rd, 1971, the Gay Liberation Front was trying to get started at UT. And so we might have been the earliest or one of the earliest in Tennessee. However, the UT archives also sort of tells a story of how for 3 years they petitioned the university to become an official student organization and were denied multiple times. So, so this newsletter sort of chronicles it from their point of view, and then in the UT archives you get the point of view from the administration, which is pretty interesting. Something that I'm super excited about is a donation that we've got from Kathy Hyland. I presented at the MCC Church a few weeks back, and I have been looking for copies of the Mother Jones Gazette, which was a lesbian newspaper or newsletter from 1971 to 73, and I've seen it mentioned in literature and in bibliographies, and I wasn't sure if any of these existed. And Kathy, brought me this, and she's like, "Oh, I have these. Do you want these?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I think that these are the only ones that exist." And so I said, "I'll scan them and give them back." And she's like, "I don't want them. You can have them." So it's really curious how some people are super attached and they're like, "No, you can't have it. You can copy it, but I want it back." And then other people are like, "I don't need that. Take it." So I'm super excited about that acquisition or donation, I guess. We also had tried to do digital archiving, which I find so much more difficult than physical archiving, but a lot of bars and websites that have closed or disbanded. And so going back and trying to capture that is a really interesting process. I worry that there's going to be this gigantic hole, like we'll have things from the 60s through the 90s, and then like when everything went digital, I feel like we're going to have this gap in archives. So the other thing that we're working on is trying to get students involved, and I'm lucky enough to have a collaboration with an anthropology professor who together we offer a 1-credit course, and so we get students from all across the university in different disciplines who want to be involved with building the archive. So whether it's transcription or doing metadata. And for instance, this student took the locations of different bars and mapped them out with the history that we found in different publications. So, all right. And then there are some considerations that I think definitely probably go across all types of archiving, but especially maybe LGBT. So the issue of privacy, you mentioned earlier, sort of if the person wasn't out in life, how do you go back and or we're taking donations of videos or photographs or names of people who maybe they could have never imagined the internet or that those things would be posted there. So trust issues, not only the community trusting an archive, but also that kind of leads into our state and university climate. So we always haven't been the best at collecting items of marginalized groups or treating those communities well. So something that I sort of stay up at night worrying about is that our LGBTQ elders are getting older, and we already lost a major generation due to the AIDS epidemic, but those our folks who did survive, they're getting older. I mentioned earlier sort of the digital dark ages of how are we collecting things that are on Facebook or on social media or websites. And then earlier I mentioned sort of this attachment to things. So some people don't want to give it up. Some people are like, you can have it all. So that balance. And we've sort of chronicled all of these lessons learned and considerations in a book chapter that will be coming out in 2022 called Building Representative Archives. So yeah, thank you so much. And thanks for having me. And yeah, I think we all are ready to answer any questions people might have, or yeah.
Yep, there already were some in the chat from earlier. There were a couple. So let's see. The first one is from Ivana. Also, apologies if I butcher anyone's name. Is there any plan to participate / integrate with Invisible Histories? I think we can each individually answer for our own institutions. The Gore Center has not. I am personally aware of them. I'm going to the Queer History South Conference this coming February in Dallas, Texas. I've kind of at the Gore Center and in Middle Tennessee have just focused on building community. Sorry, if you can mute yourselves, please. Thank you. In Middle Tennessee, I've kind of just focused on building community partnerships first before going to like an external organization, if that makes sense. But I am very aware of what they're doing. I have colleagues who are friends with, I think his name's Josh, is that who runs the whole thing? And they speak well of him, but I'm trying to find out more, I guess. And I know, and Donna and Brigitte know this, pre-pandemic, all three of us were like gung-ho about starting this statewide organization, like a collaborative consortium where, you know, institutions across the state who are either have queer history collection or are wanting to start them, we could help each other out and kind of just do all of it within the state. So my evil plan of doing these 2 sessions was trying to get all of us back together and talking about that statewide collaboration again, now that we're kind of slowly coming out of the pandemic, and maybe we have more time or less time. Actually, I don't even know anymore. Feels like we're all super busy and burnt out now. But so I think we've kind of been focusing more on within our community first before going externally.
I can echo that. The CORES group is very aware of the Invisible Histories project, and a few of them have kind of had some contact with them, but not enough to really integrate. And I feel like eventually we'll get there, you know, but like Sarah said, I'm really vested in kind of building community here, and trust, and the things that Donna touched on. Those are things that are really important to me, especially since our archives haven't always reflected this community that is out there. Like, we have this vibrant community, and it's not just you know, one particular group of people. And so I really want to build some trust within our community here, with elders, with younger people, with our on-camp. I want to have a better relationship with our GSA here. One of the things that we are lacking, that were supposed to come with the Out Memphis papers, was the actual history of Gala and then Stonewall Tigers, which are our 2 on campus. We do have an older GSA that went back into the 80s, but I don't know anything about it. There's no documentation, so it's kind of hard to know. But yeah, Invisible Histories is definitely on my radar, and I will be on maternity leave when the next. I saw that flyer and I was like, man, darn it, I won't even be around. So I'm going to have to sit this one out. I know that I had colleagues that were wanting to attend the Invisible Histories conference when it was in, I guess it was going to be in 2020, but I think that ended up being canceled. So it's kind of like echoing what Sarah said, is that yes, very much, but I think that as a state we need to come together too, because I mean, like, it's hard to approach this huge organization now that just kind of started out in Alabama and it's expanded into all of these states, when we don't have a great handle on what each of our institutions have, or maybe even our county archives, you know, like, are there county archives out there doing small things? And I would like to see us come together first before we try to take on this like behemoth project, which is so important, but then also kind of like scary too at the same time. So
Yeah, I totally echo all that. I'm so glad we're all on the same page. Definitely, I think that there's so much context that goes into these collections and the community that it would be, I mean, it's hard for somebody in the community who lives here to sort of build that trust and that knowledge base, that I think it would be super hard for, I just think, yeah, there's so much work for us to do here first. But I'm totally excited about what Invisible Histories are doing. I went to their first conference in Birmingham, and hopefully I'll be able to go to the next one. But yeah, they're doing great stuff. I think that they're shining a spotlight on Southern queer history, so that's great. But yeah, I look forward to working with you all on a statewide collaboration. Any other questions?
There was one also earlier from Matt or MAT. It's in all caps, so I'll say MAT. This isn't really for us, but does TSLA collect any in this area? So the next session on Tuesday, Patsy Mitchell from TSLA will be speaking. She did send me an email earlier saying there wasn't a lot for her to speak about. So spoiler alert, it's probably not gonna be the most positive presentation for her to give. I will say from personal usage, they do have on microfilm full run of Dare/Query, and I think a full run of Xenogeny. If not full run, most of Xenogeny. I have used those on microfilm. And I think, and they have a couple of photographs I've found of some like Nashville queer bars. But yeah, Patsy Mitchell will speak more on what TSLA has and maybe possible future plans they might have. But as you all know, they're a government archive, so they're restricted. Does anyone have any other questions? Feel free to put them in the chat or, turn on your mic and talk, whatever.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just wanted to add, Brigitte already mentioned that there is a collection at the Memphis and Shelby County Library and Information Center of mostly three-dimensional. I'm afraid I'm the culprit. I tell people if they want to give two-dimensional things, try the library. Three-dimensional things, go to the U of M. But and there is a digitized collection also at Rhodes College and some oral history, and a pride collection of artifacts at the Pink Palace Museum. So we have at least those four in Memphis. I don't think Out Memphis is maintaining much anymore. And
I think there's a little in their attic still, but I think that they're very motivated to kind of spread the love as far as what remains. So.
And I've used those digital collections from Rhodes. They have like Gaze and Gaiety, and which you mentioned, Brigitte. Yeah, which, for my own Nashville research, you can find Nashville stuff in other, in newspapers throughout the South. So yeah, so that was really helpful to me. I was very excited to see that digitized.
I can say that locally, the former Pink Palace, it's now called the Museum of Science and History. They will be having a really large, it's going to be 5,000 square feet. It's going to be an homage to Stonewall. It's a traveling exhibit, but in addition to that, they're going to have 2,500 square feet dedicated to local LGBTQ history, and it's going to be an exhibit next summer. So we do have a question from Melinda Brown.
What are your collections policies for LGBT collections specifically, or just generally? I guess there might not be much of a difference between those two, really.
For the LGBTQ collections.
For like manuscript collections, it's pretty much the same. we take any manuscript in. For the Gore Center, our scope is 20th and 21st century Middle Tennessee history, so it would have to be within that. And then for oral histories, we do a little different, especially with people who maybe younger people or even older people who might not be out to everyone in their family or something. We do allow people to put a restriction on that for X amount of years. Usually we suggest 10, but if they want to go higher, I personally have no problem with that. So that is a little, but we also technically do that for other oral histories too, but we really make sure that when we're doing an oral history with someone from the LGBTQ community that they know they can restrict access to it. Yeah, other than that, it's pretty much the same as our other policies, which you can find on the Gore Center's website. Our collections policy is up there.
We have a very unformalized policy, and it's mainly because when my present supervisor came in, he really reduced kind of like our collecting scope. So we do focus on West Tennessee, and I also include the MidSouth in that because where we're located in the state, it very much has to do with Mississippi and Arkansas too. And we do focus, you know, we'll take almost anything affiliated with the University of Memphis or its former entities, and then also Memphis itself. So we have tons of oral histories, but they've all been donations from our oral history office, which is run by Charles Crawford here at the University of Memphis, and it has been for over 50 years. So we are getting into the business of oral histories, kind of, like I said, this is a great way to help contextualize our manuscripts, and then also the three-dimensional items and ephemera that come to us. So that's kind of all part of what I would say is probably the newest part of our collecting policy, is that when we collect LGBTQ material, I do want to try to get some type of either recorded or written documentation that might be sitting down with someone and letting them kind of tell us what the metadata is, you know, like give us some notes, or, you know, do you want to add anything to this? So I've got a background in anthropology and ethnography, so that's kind of where I'm coming from as far as that goes. But it's just, you know, kind of just trying to capture a little bit more context, so you're not just like looking at this button or this necklace, you know, so like these things could tell the story, but unless you ask the question, you wouldn't know. So
yeah, with ours, I think along the same lines, ours is a little bit more informal. East Tennessee is our area, although we've really focused more on Knoxville and like its immediate surrounding counties, just because, again, building those relationships. And then we hope to sort of spread out farther. And so we do also, with our oral histories or our donations, we allow them to fill out a submission form where they can decide what types of metadata they want to include. Also, if there's going to be an embargo, all the way up until, you know, we have one oral history that they don't want it disclosed until after they die. So there's all types of, we give folks all types of options. And that, I think that goes into, again, like building trust and doing right by the folks, and making sure that like we're working with them to preserve these collections. We're not just, you know, taking them, taking these and sort of like putting them in our own spaces. So yeah.
Any other questions? We can probably take one or two more. But I do just want to say thank you to Brigitte and Donna. I've also learned so much today, and we're all doing cool things, and it makes me excited. I'm going to email you later, and we're gonna have a meeting. We're gonna get the statewide org going. Like,
Great.
There's so much going on. Next Tuesday will be very Nashville focused. It'll be Kathy from Vanderbilt University, Patsy, as I mentioned, from Tennessee State Library and Archives, and Elizabeth Rivera from Lipscomb University. And you might have seen in my presentation on the oral histories, I mentioned Lipscomb. It's an I'll let her get into it, but real quick, like one of my students who now graduated with his MA, yay, John Broadwell, did an amazing master's thesis. He was a grad of Lipscomb, and he recorded like 15 to 20 oral histories going back to the 60s with LGBTQ Lipscomb students, you know. And if you don't know anything about Lipscomb, it's a very Christian conservative university. So he did some groundbreaking work. And those oral histories both live at the Gore Center and Lipscomb, which goes back to the trust that we've talked about. Elizabeth will get into that. She doesn't necessarily trust her university to always keep those oral histories, so she wanted to make sure a second place had them, just in case something mysteriously happens to them, or they're told not to provide access to them or something. The Gore Center will do that for them. So that's next Tuesday. Thank you everyone for coming.
One last thing.
Yes.
So recently we invited, in conjunction with Delta State University out of Mississippi, Dr. Philip Gordon to University of Memphis, and we did record his session. It's on Gay Faulkner and the kind of like acknowledging of queer South in literature. And this was a fantastic publication that was wildly like not attended, but there were attendance online. If you're really interested in kind of like representation, especially kind of like a re-examining of literature, Dr. Philip Gordon did a really good job, and he did tell me that his book right now is on sale if you buy it through Mississippi University Press. I'm not trying to plug the book, but I am definitely trying to plug the session. I linked it into the chat because I think it's definitely worth the hour and 21 minutes that it runs. So.
Oh wow, awesome!
Yeah.
Thank you, Brigitte.
All right.
All right, have a good afternoon, everyone, and we'll see you next week.